Hey, this is Pastor Jay Lee wishing you a happy new year from the Daily Sabbath podcast. Hey guys, Pastor Jay here, and welcome to the Daily Sabbath podcast. And this is our first interview episode of 2022. And man, we are starting with a bang. Now, for those of you guys who follow us on Instagram, a couple weeks ago, I posted a preview of some of the topics that I'm planning on covering this year on the podcast. And man, I'm excited. I'm also a little bit intimidated, but I'm also very excited about the topics that we have lined up this year. And I'm taking a little bit different approach this year where I have several topics that I actually want to revisit a couple of times during the year. And so they're not exactly series, like it's not going to be like, 5 interviews in a row about this particular topic, but just these reoccurring topics that we'll revisit with different interviews over the course of the year. And so here are some of the topics that I'm planning on covering this year. 1, faith in politics. That's right, we are going there. Conspiracy theories. Yes, that's right, we are going there. Parenting, because frankly, I'm a parent and I need some advice, and I'm sure you do too. And another series that I'm calling Teach Me How to Study, in which we'll talk about things that will help you guys understand and interpret the scriptures. Spiritual but not religious. This is a big one, right? Because increasingly more and more people are identifying as spiritual but not religious. And so I want to talk about, what does that mean? Is there something that we as Christians can learn about people who identify as spiritual but not religious? And another series that I'm calling Inglorious Pastors. And honestly, this will be kind of a series almost for people who are pastors or who are planning on going into pastoral ministry. But honestly, I think it'll be helpful for all of us, right? Because even if we're not a pastor, if we're a believer, we have a pastor. And so, this will really be sort of a behind the scenes, like what it looks like to be a pastor. And, some of the things that they don't really tell you about when you're training in seminary. And of course, another series of conversations that I'm calling A Christian and an Atheist. And that is our topic today. I'm interviewing Calvin Smith. He's a fellow podcast host as well as an atheist. And this is the first of what I hope will be more conversations just between a Christian and an atheist. Now, in this first conversation with Calvin, I just wanted to sort of get to know Calvin and his journey a little bit better. But we do cover some questions about the faith. And so I'm excited to share this interview with you guys. And then at the end of the interview, I'm going to come back with some closing thoughts. And so without further ado, here is volume 1 of A Christian and an Atheist, my interview with Calvin Smith. The topic that we're talking about today is what I'm calling sort of what I hope will be a series of conversations called A Christian and an Atheist. I think over the years, I've really rarely, if ever, had any opportunities to actually talk to somebody who identifies as an atheist. And so, I thought it would be really an interesting thing to actually have some conversations and get some different perspectives on the podcast. And so my guest today is Calvin Smith. He is a fellow podcast host. He hosts a podcast called Unquestionable with Calvin Smith. And I met Calvin, and one of the things that struck me about Calvin is that he just seems like a really nice guy. And while I want to have a conversation with atheists and maybe engage some things where, maybe we have differences, at the same time, I want it to be a friendly conversation. And so I met Calvin, I connected with Calvin over Facebook, and he just seems like a genuinely nice guy. But on top of that, very knowledgeable, that Calvin is pretty knowledgeable about the Christian faith and the Bible. And so I thought Calvin would actually be the perfect guest to have in our part 1 of A Christian and an Atheist. And so Calvin, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate you having me on.
Now, before we jump into the conversation and, kind of get to know you and your journey a little bit more, I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about your podcast. So Unquestionable with Calvin Smith. And the podcast is not like a podcast about atheism, right? Like, what is the podcast about?
Yeah. I'm glad you actually brought that up. I run the podcast Unquestionable with Calvin Smith. We're coming right up on the year anniversary of it. Will be in March. I started it in last March. And originally it was going to be a podcast where I kind of more so wanted to debunk things. I wanted to essentially be a debunker, because I'm a skeptic myself and obviously an atheist. But I didn't more so vibe with that. I started looking more into like street epistemology, which I can, go more into detail on that later. And, I started reading the Bible more and studying the Bible and the Christian faith more and just other faith ideologies too, Muslims and Buddhists, just how people are coming to their conclusions on their beliefs. And so I wanted to incorporate that more into my podcast. So I kind of switched gears a little bit and I started talking more about, for one, history, just because I'm a history nerd and I love, learning about American history, European history, Egyptian history, literally any type of history. Love learning about it, just knowing about our origins, where we came from, and taking a little bit more of a different spin on things, talking about like Atlantis, like an ancient lost civilization that was once lost, the possibility and the evidence for that. So I talk to a lot of Egyptologists and NASA engineers, getting their opinions on the matters. And then I like, kind of as a side piece, I guess, talk to people about what they believe and why they believe it. So, for example, I had a ET contactee and Akashic record reader and supposed psychic Debbie Solaris on, and we talked about why she believes she talks to aliens and, what messages that they send her and how she has changed her life depending on this. And then I've talked to an ex-Jehovah's Witness, too, who actually, he was one of my tattoo artists. I got a tattoo from him. And he was like, hey, you do a podcast? I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness. You should talk to me. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, you're literally the perfect person to talk to. So I had Xander on, and we talked about, their experience in the Jehovah's Witness. And then I do street epistemology, too. I'm kind of a practicing street epistemologist now. I had Anthony Magnabosco on, who is the executive director of Street Epistemology International. And I guess if no one is familiar with street epistemology, it's a Socratic method of questioning to get to the basis of what people believe and why they believe it. That's like the short, quick answer for it. It's not me as an atheist, enforcing my belief on anyone or calling anyone dumb for what they believe. And street epistemology can be used for any type of belief. It can be used for, do you think abortion should be legalized? Do you think gun control should be more enforced? Do you think we should close the borders and build that wall? It can be used in all these different type of life situations that you take to believe is true. And it doesn't necessarily apply. It can apply to anyone, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, or atheist. Anyone can do street epistemology, and you probably have already done it, and you didn't even realize it.
I see. So it's really just kind of a method for evaluating kind of what you know and what you believe and why you believe it.
Right. It's all questions, no answers, essentially. I'm asking you questions, and just how Anthony Magnabosco puts it is placing pebbles in people's shoes. Just getting someone to think about something that maybe they didn't think about before, bring it home. It may not change their belief at all, but that's not the point. And the point isn't to change anyone's belief. It's just to get you to think about something that maybe you didn't think about before. Maybe it may strengthen your faith or weaken it. That's all up to you and how you evaluate your evidence.
Yeah, that's cool, actually. I before I met you, I'd never heard of that before, but I think I really resonate with that, because I think something that I've always felt, and something that I even tell people sometimes, is that one of the most powerful things that you can do is ask people questions.
For sure.
That a lot of times, asking somebody the right questions is more effective than trying to, argue them to death or lecture them or debate them.
Exactly. And that's not to say, I don't know a bunch, I could come at you like the angry firebrand atheist if that's what someone wants from me, to be the angry guy. I can throw out tons of verses that some people may not be happy with, but that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to just question you, hey, why do you believe this? What evidence do you have to believe it? Do you have a way to test it? It's just simple questions. It's not attacking anybody, or, the whole goal of street epistemology is to part ways without there being any anger or negativity in between the two of you. It's ending on a good note overall. And if you didn't end on a good note, then you didn't do street epistemology right.
Well, I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the tone that we're going for here in this conversation.
For sure.
And so Yeah, so if you guys are interested, go ahead and check out Calvin's podcast, Unquestionable with Calvin Smith. I'm pretty sure you can find that anywhere where you can find podcasts. You can also find it on YouTube as well. And so, yeah, Calvin, if you wouldn't mind just kind of, maybe we could just get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about just sort of your background in the Christian faith or just in any kind of organized religion?
For sure. Yeah. So I never, grew up to be like a super religious guy. Me and my family went to church until I was about 6, 7 years old. And then, about that time is when my parents split up and we just stopped going to church after that. So obviously it was kind of before my time. I have some very faint memories of being in the church and, sitting in the pews and listening to the preacher, sometimes trying to get away from my mom and crawl under the pews and, play around in church. I wasn't necessarily paying attention too much, if I'm being honest. But I mean, I was 6 years old. What can I say? And but it was still kind of enforced on us. It was enforced that there is a God. He's watching you. So make sure you do things as if grandma is watching you, or people are watching you essentially. So I took that to heart. It wasn't until I don't know, maybe I was like 15, 16 that I just wasn't like 100% sure. I was talking to my sister about things and I was just, I was like, okay, I'm going to consider myself agnostic. But at that point, I knew really nothing about the Bible or really any type of religion at all. I was just calling myself agnostic because I didn't know, nor did I really care. But shortly after that, I kind of fell into a little bit of a hole. I kind of reference it as my tinfoil hat stage. I fell into a lot of like conspiracy theories and, Hillary Clinton was a reptile and Justin Bieber was a reptile and head of the Illuminati. And I was writing articles about, alien species that I had zero evidence for. I just read some article on Google, on Wikipedia about some alien species that we have no evidence for. And I was writing articles about it like it was real and we had evidence for it. And it wasn't until I started questioning my own religious beliefs, because I started looking into conspiracy theories, found stuff about like the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. And I kind of started looking into the actual Bible itself more. And so I downloaded a Bible on my phone. I downloaded the King James Bible on my phone, the whole thing. And I read it on my phone. So you started
with an easy version.
Yeah, not necessarily the easiest version to start off with, but that was like, when you go on Google or you watch like these atheist TV shows, most of the time they're referencing the King James. They just are. So I was like, okay, well, if they're all talking about this version, I guess that's the one I should probably read. Little did I know that it's really hard to read that version. So I have since gotten an easier version. I have a New English translation that I have sitting next to me. And I read the Bible from cover to cover to the best of my ability. I did skip over some pieces, which I'm currently, trying to get to right now. And overall, I saw that it was a book that had a lot of claims in it, but there wasn't a whole lot of evidence to support it. For me, for me, by the end of it, I didn't have any of this like spiritual awakening or feel any differently. I just kind of was like, this is a book, okay? And regardless of whether the God is real or not, and whether I believe in the God, I don't really like the things that were said in the Bible, a lot of them. Things from Luke to 1 Corinthians to John, there's like little verses in there that I wasn't a big fan of, whether the God was real or not. Atheism came shortly after that as I kind of started to break down those verses a little bit more. I didn't really find a good reason to continue to believe in a God that would condone this. It seemed to me that the book seemed to be one written by fallible men, and I didn't see anything personally, evidence for an afterlife or a God in it. That's for me personally. So I just kind of wanted to investigate why people do believe this. Why, what do you see or what do you read or interpret from the Bible that's making you believe in this deity? Because I'm honestly curious. Do you know something that I don't? That's, getting lost in translation for me. So that's, kind of why I do straight epistemology, is because maybe someone tells me something that's going to convert me back to Christianity. I don't know. The only way that you're going to know is by asking them questions,
Yeah, you're genuinely seeking to know, like, maybe these people know something that I don't know or have seen something that I don't know. And that's kind of the missing piece of why, for me, when I read the Bible, for the most part, it sounds like, for the most part, cover to cover, you read it expecting, well, I mean, if this is really, the inspired word of God, I'll probably have some sort of experience, or I'll
Exactly.
probably know it by the end of this. And you didn't have that experience.
Correct.
And then on top of that, it sounds like also along the way, not only did you not have sort of that spiritual awakening that you thought might happen as you investigated the Bible, but in fact, you found a lot of things that you really disagreed with and you didn't
Correct.
like very much.
Right, right.
Right?
And
Yeah.
I thought, as I was applying the skepticism to the Bible, I thought, okay, well, I need to apply the same skepticism to everything I believe. So I applied the same, line of questioning, the Socratic questioning and straight epistemology. I applied it to my alien belief, believing that aliens were walking around and that there was a lizard people race that was running the government. Um, Needless to say, there's no
Yeah.
evidence for that, so I don't believe that anymore. To be frank, I don't even really believe in aliens anymore. I believe that there's UFOs, there's unidentified flying objects, but once we cross that line and call it alien, that's where it needs to stop because we have no evidence of it being alien. It very well could be human, or it could be, some type of underwater species or something that we don't know. I don't know. So once we cross that line and call a UFO an extraterrestrial craft, that's when I say stop. You can't do that. So it's applying that same skepticism to everything, and it's because of the Bible, reading the Bible from cover to cover to my best ability, that I was able to do that and kind of dig myself out of that conspiracy theory rut.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that's a whole nother podcast episode right there because,
For sure.
and actually I am planning this year to have some episodes where we do talk a little bit about conspiracy theories because I feel like
Interesting.
that's
That'd be
such
cool.
a major topic that is, super relevant
Yeah,
to a
it's
lot of
very
people.
hot right now.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you say, it's almost like I want to say it was a good thing that you read the Bible
I mean, I would
and,
say, yeah, I would say it was a good thing. I would. Yeah.
uh yeah, so in a strange way, like obviously for me as a Christian, it's not a good thing that you went to the Bible and you came away maybe having less faith than when you started. That's not a good thing, but
Right.
in some strange, weird way, it helped you dig yourself out of this hole of conspiracy theories, which I know for a lot of people who do fall into that, it's like really hard to get out of it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
It
so
took a minute. Yeah. And even now I still look back on some of the conspiracy theories and I'm like, I don't know, man. I think Bush did 9/11, but
yeah. Well, the thing that I always tell people is that I mean, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but if I ever sit down and start watching some of these YouTube videos, like by the end of it, like it's like it doesn't
right.
sound
Right.
impossible. Like, it sounds
Exactly.
somewhat plausible. So, I could see why people fall into it for sure. Because even for me, if I expose myself enough to that content, I start to be like, okay,
Yep.
maybe there's a chance. I mean, I'm
I mean,
not
that's the
saying I
whole point.
believe
That's
it.
exactly what like Ancient Aliens is trying to do and everything. That's the whole point.
Uh-huh. And maybe just really quick before we move on to the next question. So just kind of something that I'm hearing you say, because you're sort of talking about how there's no evidence to support any of these things, right? And so you start to that's when you start to say, okay, we need to stop there. And so just out of curiosity, are you coming from a perspective where you believe that the only things that we can truly know are things that we can prove, like empirically? I was detecting a little bit of that kind of thought in some of what you were saying, but I just wanted to give you a chance to sort of clarify that.
It's a little bit. I mean, I'm a little flip floppy even on that subject. See, my thing is with the God belief is that if a God was real and he wanted me to know that he existed and that he loved me, he wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it would take to make me believe that, but God sure would. So my question would be: is why are these other people being awakened by God and shown God, and they see God in their dreams and they see him in the corner of their bedrooms, and
Mm-hmm.
they have these near death experiences where they see God, but why haven't I had any of these experiences yet? I am very truly trying to seek out these experiences. I want to know what you guys, I'm truly seeking God.
Yeah.
It seems like either God is ignoring me or he's
Mm-hmm.
just not there to begin with. And
Yeah.
as of now, I mean, I don't have any evidence to support there being a God. At least that's as far as where I stand in my God
Yeah.
belief, at least.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense. I mean, honestly, something that you just said there sounds very similar to I think what sometimes even Christians describe in their experience where, even though you might have like a bunch of people who are Christians, that a lot of times maybe one group of Christians experiences things like miraculous type events or healings, and then
Right.
another group of Christians, they don't experience that, right? And so, it's like, well, I mean, I hear all these stories about these people who, were dying of cancer or they had some sort of disease, and they prayed and God healed them, and then here I am here in my sickness or whatever suffering I'm going through, and I'm certainly praying and I'm sincere, but it just seems like it's not happening. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I can identify definitely. I feel like I'm kind of one of those people where, I don't know how familiar you are with these kinds of terms, but like there's branches of Christianity that are more what we would call charismatic, where they're a lot more about like sort of like the miraculous gifts
Yeah.
and or just experiencing very miraculous type
Right.
things. And
Right.
whereas I've always kind of come from more of a like that stuff doesn't really happen in the context that
Exactly.
I
So
walk in. And
it's like at that point, that's when I'm like, okay, so there's all these different denominations of Christianity. How do I,
Mhm.
as an atheist, know which one is true and which one, how do I know which translation of the Bible is true? How do I know the Mormons don't have it right? Because we can't
Mhm.
all be right, but one of us can be. So
Yeah.
could be, maybe, however you want to put it.
Yeah, we
But
can't all be right, but one of us could be right or none of us could be right, but we can't
right,
all be right.
exactly. So it's like that would mean that all these different denominations of Christianity essentially have it wrong. Do the Jehovah's Witnesses have it right? Do the Mormons have it right? Do the Presbyterians have it right? Do the evangelicals?
Mhm.
Who's got the right translation? Who's reading the word correctly? It's just confusing me. How do I tell, who's telling the truth? Because I honestly I want to read the right translation.
Man, I feel like we're opening up like 20 different conversations that we could potentially have. We've got a gold mine here of different conversations we could have in talking about like, translations of the Bible and yeah, differences between denominations. Because, I mean, there's definitely a difference between like, a person who identifies as a Baptist versus a Presbyterian
Exactly.
versus a person who identifies as a Baptist and a Mormon. And I would say
Right.
that, by and large, a lot of the denominations within Christianity that we would identify as being orthodox, like within the mainstream, that the differences really, though people over the years have made them seem like they're big differences, are actually pretty minor in terms of like central Christian beliefs that we would believe to be like, this is a difference between heaven and hell or something like that, right? Versus, like I would say most of the denominations that, we consider to be within orthodoxy, the differences are actually more of a secondary or even tertiary
Mm.
level. Whereas, yeah, a difference between, maybe a Baptist and a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness, those are more crucial differences. So, I mean,
Right.
if we were going to have that conversation, maybe that's something that we can revisit
Yeah.
sometime in the future. But yeah, I think so. There is some care that needs to be taken in terms of like, how big are the differences between which specific groups you're talking about.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so the point is clear though that, you have pursued this, you've made an honest attempt at reading the Bible, and you kind of came away with less faith, less faith than when you
Most
started.
definitely.
Yeah, and so at that point, that basically kind of drove you from being what you would say is agnostic to fully identifying as atheist.
Right, right. And I mean, there were multiple books that I read in between this too. I just recently finished up reading. It's a scary title, but it's called A
Hmm.
Manual for Creating Atheists. Now, it sounds scary, but believe it or not,
Yeah.
that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to scare you. It's judging a book by its cover, literally. It's written by a guy named Dr. Peter Boghossian, and he actually technically, I guess you could say, revamped or restarted this movement of straight epistemology. He kind of,
Mm.
revived it in this book, and Anthony Magnabosco took it from there and kind of reworked it a little bit. But yeah, in this book, A Manual for Creating Atheists, it describes a lot of ways on how to talk to Christians about what they believe and why they believe it, and different questions that you could ask and different questions that he has for atheists, all the conversations he has with atheists that are written in the book. Um,
Mm.
it's so that was one of the books that I read that kind of helped me also through my faith is just kind of learning what questions to even ask myself, let alone other people. And what other books did I read? I read a couple books in the meantime of kind of being more open to calling myself atheist. So now what I'm kind of trying to do in the Bible, I'm kind of during my second read through right now. So I bought a New English translation. That's what I'm reading right now. And I'm going through the pages and I'm finding the contradictions between the King James Version, which I have King James Version, and then my New English translation. Then I also have a Book of Mormon. I'm going to combine all three of them, and I'm going to critique them essentially and see where the contradictions lie. You know, how someone could take the King James a different way than the New English. So that's kind of the goal that I'm in right now. And
interesting. Yeah. I mean, and I would love to hear kind of what you come up with in that study.
Yeah.
Do you think that in that process you would also evaluate? Because, you know, I mean, I think anybody who knows anything about, like, you know, issues of translation and issues of, you know, kind of like where the scriptures come from, like manuscript evidence and things like that, you know, issues of transmission over the years. I think anybody who is knowledgeable about kind of like what the source material is for, you know, the Bibles that we have today would acknowledge, like, yeah, you know, there's differences sometimes between some of the manuscripts. You know, sometimes there's issues of translation where, you know, scholars are not 100% sure what is exactly the correct translation in certain places.
Right.
One thing I would say in defense of the Bible, though, is probably that it's the most critiqued book ever in the history of humans.
I would agree with that.
And just the level of scholarship that has gone to either defending or critiquing the Bible. But one thing that is clear is that all the issues that you have with the Bible in terms of like manuscript evidence, translation issues, is like fully on display. Like nobody's discovering new translation issues and nobody's discovering any new manuscript issues. Like, it's all on the table because people have been studying this thing and critiquing this thing to death for so long.
My biggest thing with the translation issues is that, you know, I believe it's in Matthew, I could be wrong, where it says God is not the author of confusion. I can't remember if it's Mark or Matthew. But
I think it might be in one of the epistles, actually. But yeah, go ahead.
I think so. Okay. My confusion. But yeah, it states that God is not the author of confusion. And I'm sorry, but I'm pretty confused. You know, because why would God allow his word to be, you know, tampered with so many times over thousands of years, so many different translations, so many different scribes, you know, rewriting it, retranslating it. And, you know, it's even put in the margins of the Bible, in some Bibles, that, you know, hey, this is not, you know, this was actually edited by a scribe. We caught this dude, you know, editing this verse here, by the way. So it's like, why would God allow his word to be tampered with if it's the, you know, perfect word of God, or this is supposed to be what you follow and judge your life by? You know, and these scribes are changing it, and yet you're living your life by it. It just kind of confuses me as to why people would believe something that has been tampered with so many times.
I mean, it is a fair point. I think that is a good question. And again, man, I feel like here's another good episode. So here's episode. Calvin, you're going to have to come back on like 20 times. Yeah, 20 times, man. You're going to be on this podcast a lot. But yeah, you know, I think one of the issues that, you know, would have to talk about, because I feel like you can almost see it in two different ways. Like, in one direction, you could see it sort of the way that you're seeing it, where it's like, if this is really the word of God, why would there be a translation issue? Why would there be a manuscript issue? Why would there be like, hey, we can see here that these last 10 verses of Mark are not present in, you know, the oldest manuscripts, right? Like, so I could see how you're seeing it the way that you see it. I think another way that sometimes people see it is that there's a security in the fact that there is so much evidence and there's so much study in it that we do know where the issues in the text are. And so a couple of things that we can kind of get from that is, one, we know exactly where the issues in the text are. And then two, we can also see that the issues that we have in the text, by and large, you know, 99% of them really don't bring into question any of the major doctrines of the faith. That, you know, we're not talking, you know, like the manuscript issues are not around did Jesus come and die on the cross and rise from the dead? And you know what I mean? Like, it's like maybe there's an issue on something that's more peripheral where it's like, yeah, we're not really sure what
Right.
the perfect reading of this text is. But what we can say is we see where the issues are, and none of those bring into question any of the major tenets of the faith. So, you know, I mean, I've heard it presented in both ways, where people of faith who are looking at these things, actually it strengthens their faith, the amount of manuscript evidence there is and how much we know about the transmission of it, and seeing where the issues are and where the issues are not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, kind of going off that is like another, it's not even just necessarily the Christian faith either. You know, how do Christians know, you know, because I could have, let's say I have a Christian come up to me and they have a Bible and they say, you know, this Bible, I have faith in this Bible and it makes me feel good and I believe in the God based off of the words in this book. But then I can have a Muslim come up to me, say, I have faith in this book. I believe in Allah. This book gives me faith. You know, he loves me. How do I know which one is right? They're both saying the same thing. You know, this guy says he was in a car accident and Allah saved him. But then this guy says he was in a car accident and Yahweh saved him. How do I know who is right? You know, they're both showing me a book. How can we demonstrate this? You know, a Buddhist could come up with the Bhagavad Gita and tell me the same thing. He has faith in this book that Buddha is watching him. Or I could have someone come up with a Norse mythology and say that Odin is watching him, or Thor. So how do I know which one is right?
That's a good question. And maybe if you wouldn't mind letting me ask you a question here on that.
Sure.
Just out of curiosity, just because it seems like, honestly, I feel like you're more well-read and more studied than I am. So, you know, like you have more round knowledge, I think, in terms of like different faiths and things like that than probably even I do.
Well, now I'm blushing.
Well, we'll see if that's true or not based on your answer to this question. No, I'm just kidding. But like, I'm just kind of curious for you, in your perspective, do you feel like there's any difference in the reliability, or maybe I'll just use the word reliability. Do you feel like there's any difference in the reliability of the Bible as opposed to, the Quran or Book of Mormon, or, you know, like a Hindu sacred text or anything like that? Or do you kind of feel like they're all pretty much of equal validity? You don't really see any difference between them at all?
Well, overall, I mean, in short, I don't necessarily, you know, I haven't read, you know, the Quran or anything. It's on my list of things to read, is the Quran and, you know, some Buddhist texts. And, but so I don't know a ton of what exactly is even in the Quran. I know like a handful of surahs that are in there, but not really anything off the top of my head. You know, my thing is, I mean, I don't necessarily see much of a difference. For me, they're all books that have claims in them. And until the claims can be demonstrated, I don't see a reason to believe them. You know, Jesus dying on the cross, for example, or Jesus walking on water. Actually, let's go with that one. We can't believe that he walked on water until we have evidence of him walking on water. The book simply saying that he walked on water. Meanwhile, there's no other religious texts that say this. Why do you believe that he did this just because this book says it in this one verse? Just like, you know, in the Quran, I would argue that the Quran is more scientifically accurate than the Bible. I would say that.
Interesting. What makes you say that?
I don't know a ton of what's going on in the Quran, but I know I have looked into a couple of things that are in the Quran, and just from those couple of things, they've gotten some, not necessarily, they have a couple straight up correct scientific, you know, facts that are pretty easy to, you know, test as a layman, I guess. But as far as the Bible goes, I mean, within the first couple sentences, it says that there was plants before there was a sun and moon. I mean, it says there's a firmament. Flat earthers go crazy over that. You know, it says, you know, Elisha ascended into heaven in a flying chariot. Would love to see that flaming chariot, and seeing as how Elijah was the only person to see him, but yet there's no evidence of Elisha ever existing either, because I looked into his story. Why would we believe that, you know, that happened and that there was a flaming chariot? You know, there's a lot of scientific inaccuracies that I know of in the Bible, at least. As far as all other religious textbooks. I'm not 100% sure, so I can't really say much to it, but I know that I have personally seen at least partially correct things in the Quran and some other religious texts. Although I can't necessarily read them off the top of my head or anything like I could the Bible. But yeah, I mean, I take every book as its individual thing. And even if the book is completely scientifically accurate, everything that it says is scientifically accurate, that doesn't mean that the God is real. It just means that they got these scientific facts correct. You know,
Yeah,
so,
I mean, because so I don't know, it's just interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting to kind of hear your perspective on it, because I mean, it sounds like, which I totally understand. If you're not a person of faith and you don't believe that the Bible is, the Holy Scriptures, that it makes sense that, well, just because the Bible says that this miraculous thing happened, why should I believe it? Or if the Bible says that this thing happened, that kind of goes against what we understand empirically, scientifically, what normally would happen. Yeah, I would probably believe that what would normally happen in a normal real world situation is probably what would happen, as opposed to this miraculous thing. I mean, I think one thing that maybe a Christian like myself would say is that, I mean, obviously a person of faith is coming from the perspective that this is a holy book written by God, or it's at least inspired by God. And so, if it's describing things that God did, like if you're presupposing that there is a God who created the heavens and the earth and is sovereign over all things, like it's not really difficult to believe that he could create a planet with plants and animals and things like that, by speaking it. It's not hard to believe that he could walk on water or raise somebody from the dead. So, I think that part, it's like, well, if maybe for a Christian listening to somebody who is an atheist say, yeah, I mean, why would you believe this book that describes these crazy things that can't happen? Well, if you're coming from a perspective of faith, like certainly if there really is a God who exists, who is like the God in the Bible, none of these things would be difficult for him to do. But I think the thing that I wanted to kind of maybe mention is, like, for me, and I'm like you, where I don't have like a ton of experience, reading the Book of Mormon or
Right.
the Quran or anything like that. So by no means am I an expert in any of those other texts. But one thing that I do know of the Bible that kind of lends credibility to it, I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean that all of the supernatural claims are true. But one thing that I think can be said about the Bible is that it does show a degree of reliability in terms of the historicity of it, that I don't know if the other texts can claim the same. So for instance, like, I mean, obviously the Bible is made up of many different books, but like, you have like, these books in the Old Testament, like, Genesis and, Exodus and stuff like that, which, thousands and thousands of years ago, and describing, people groups and places and cultural customs and practices where, people who study these things, historians and archaeologists, again, this doesn't mean that the supernatural claims are true, but people who study these ancient Near Eastern cultures find like, oh, there was this group of people called the Jebusites or the Hittites, or hey, like these cultural practices that are being described in the scripture. Yeah, people actually in these cultures did do those types of things, or this is what family life looked like, or there are ruins of a city called Jericho, and like things like that, where all over the Bible you find that whatever you think about the spiritual claims and the miraculous claims of it, that I think at least you have to admit that the Bible is deeply situated within real history, as opposed to, and again, I'm not an expert, and if you're listening to this and you're a Mormon, I apologize. I'm not trying to offend you. I apologize. But to my understanding, like the Book of Mormon describes a lot of like kind of like ancient histories in the Americas, which there really is no archaeological or historical evidence to support really any of it. No names of cities, no names of people groups or places. Like there's nothing to support that it's a book steeped in real histories or real peoples. And so that's one thing that I kind of see as being a difference I can't really speak to the book of to the Quran, which I would imagine also probably has a lot of history to it because it's much more modern of a book. But yeah, so that's just one thing that I see as being kind of in favor of at least the character of it being historical as opposed to just pure myth like a Thor or something like that.
Yeah, so I would say as far as scientific accuracy, I would say the Bible honestly is falling a little short on scientific accuracy. As far as historical accuracy, it's better than the scientific accuracy, but I would still argue that there are some problems with the historicity as well. For example, we have no evidence that there was ever cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no evidence that those cities ever existed. The Tower of Babel, we have no evidence that that ever happened, or that Noah's Ark ever happened, or that there were ever only two people on the planet at any given time. And
well, those, except for Sodom and Gomorrah, you're stretching back pretty far into the biblical history. That's like going back to like prehistoric, like Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden.
Right. So my thing would be is, at what point do you start believing in these stories? At what point, like, why do you say that the Tower of Babel wasn't real, but yet Jesus walking on water happened? Or why would you say that the Tower of Babel isn't real, but yet Noah's Ark happened? Why would you say that, there were only two people on the planet, but yet, the Exodus didn't actually happen? And not to mention the Exodus is always just kind of drove me crazy because it doesn't actually say what Pharaoh. It just says Pharaoh. It doesn't say who the Pharaoh was at the time. So that really throws a wrench in things as to what time period we're talking about. It just states him as Pharaoh. So I feel like that's very, 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 very vague. So it's like, why would we believe in the Exodus?
I don't know if you've ever looked into it, but there are definitely speculations about which pharaoh.
Correct. There's speculations,
potentially were,
but there's no demonstrable evidence as to who may have witnessed the firstborn of every, family in Egypt dying because they didn't put goat blood on their door. I don't think there's any evidence of that ever happening. So why would someone believe in that story or not believe in that story over another story? So that's where the historicity of the Bible kind of gets scratchy for me. And like I said earlier, I really tried to look for evidence of the existence of Elisha with an S-H-A, because there's Elijah and Elisha.
Elijah and Elisha, yeah.
Always mix up those two. Because I was looking into the story of Elisha and the two she-bears, which is, it's one of my favorite Bible stories because it's so dark. But it's I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's, why would someone believe in that story and not a different story in the Bible? Why are we cherry picking the Bible? If everything is supposed to be the Word of God and it doesn't differentiate, it doesn't have a preamble before each story saying that, hey, this story is real, this story is fake. It doesn't have any of that. It just kind of puts it all into Old Testament, New Testament, and just kind of has it in there. And people are just deciding what is real and what is not. So how can we determine what happened and what didn't?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I think for the most part, most Christians are not deciding like, oh, this part is real, this part is just, a fiction, like a myth. I think most Christians, most evangelical Christians like myself would say, no, we believe all of it is true. But if we're talking about what parts of it can we prove, like with any kind of like historical or archaeological evidence, I think we would all admit we can't prove all of it. One, because, we're talking about histories that stretch into thousands. Even Jesus, the New Testament alone is like 2,000 plus years, right? But then when you're stretching back into like Genesis, now you're really going, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So right. I think all of us would agree, or all of us would acknowledge, we don't have historical or archaeological evidence that can prove all of these stories.
Right.
I think we're more amazed that there is evidence to verify any of these things at all, right? Like, because if we're talking about something that happened 10,000 years ago, and then we do have some pieces, some artifacts from archaeology or historiography, manuscript type evidence that's like, oh, actually these places that are described here in Genesis, they really existed. This king that it talks about, that dude was a real king at that time, and so I think we kind of come from it from a different perspective where, we're not looking at it as history is not something that can be proven the same way that you can prove like, something in chemistry, right? That
Yeah.
you can't necessarily, do an experiment and replicate it in a test tube, right? History is different. History is more of you can strengthen or weaken the possibility that it actually happened, right?
Right.
Or whether this particular account you're looking at is describing it in an accurate or inaccurate way. And I think for a person like me, not being an expert, I'm not like a historian. I'm not
Right.
some like
Right.
crazy
Yeah, me neither. So
archaeology buff.
let me just
Yeah.
put that out there. I'm no expert
Okay,
either.
good.
I've just read the
We're
Bible a couple times, and I'm just a guy.
okay. But I think for somebody like me, I'm actually amazed that there is as much historical or archaeological evidence as there is at all. Just like from the New Testament all the way back to the Old Testament, it's like, wow, it gives me confidence. Actually, the more I learn that, man, this is whether or not the miraculous things happened. I know that there is a real historical context behind all of these things, and that helps me. Even though it can't get you all the way, it doesn't
Right.
get you all the
Right.
way there by any means. It still requires faith to believe in those things, but just to see that this is not Thor or Zeus or Hercules, right? This is stuff that happened. There's real histories here, and you have to decide whether or not there's enough evidence, whether it be actual historical evidence or even just evidence like within your own soul, that the faith claims themselves are also
Right.
true.
So let me ask you this: Are you of kind of the mindset that you say that we may not have the evidence right now for certain things, certain stories or whatever they're in the Bible, but
Mhm.
we are currently kind of finding evidence for things that happened. So would this kind of be a case? Let me know if I'm wrong, but are you kind of finding the evidence and then kind of plugging God into the evidence, or are you evaluating the evidence first and getting to God? Are you starting with God or ending with God?
That's a good question. Like I would say, I'm not actually not sure how to answer that question.
Sure.
First of all, I think most people of faith are not, they do not come to believe in God or come to believe in the scriptures as the word of God because they were presented with a bunch of evidence. And then it's like, you convinced me. I'll
Right,
believe it,
right. That
right?
is true. I will
Yeah,
agree.
most people, they come to believe it because they have some sort of an experience. Like they have some sort of conviction
I would agree with
that
that.
this is true, or they have some sort of experience of the reality of it. And so yeah, I don't think we disagree there, where that most people, they come to that belief because they've experienced the truth of it, not necessarily because they've seen evidence. But I think along the way, even though, like, so for me, even though I became a Christian based on no historical or scientific evidence, I just came to believe it because I experienced the power of it. But along the way, what I've been pleasantly surprised to find is that, like, if I start looking at archaeology or history, that it doesn't just completely wreck, like these historical accounts in the Bible or whatever. Like, it doesn't, like, that's like, even though I'm not looking to find evidence to necessarily prove it, or I don't need that evidence necessarily to prove it to me, I'm pleasantly surprised to find that looking at evidence does not destroy my faith in, like, the scriptures. I
Gotcha.
don't know if that answered your question, but
No, no, that
yeah.
was perfect answer, I would say. That
Okay.
was a good answer there.
So yeah, let me just kind of move us on to like the next question, which is, what is kind of your current feeling about Christians or the Christian faith, Christianity? Have you had much interaction with Christians over the years recently? What have been your sort of impressions of that? Yeah, just anything that you would want to share on that.
Yeah, so I've had tons of interactions with Christians. Like I said, I grew up pretty much Christian. We consider ourselves Christian. Like if someone asked me at 15 years old if I was Christian, I would have said I was Christian because I felt weird about saying I was agnostic. I didn't want to get judged for it.
Uh-huh.
It took me a long time before I felt comfortable calling myself an atheist, out and about. I didn't want people to judge me for that. So yeah, I've had a lot of interactions with Christians. And we used to pray at dinner and everything like that. So and even my new neighbor is actually Christian. I'm not exactly sure where he's at on his belief, but I know he's pretty deep in his belief. He's very serious about it. So I would love to have conversations with him about what he believes someday. But yeah, what I like to do to kind of get, training, I guess, on street epistemology and how I talk to theists and non-believers or whatever you want to talk about is going on Omegle, believe it or not, like the random chat site Omegle, and obviously filtering out the inappropriate stuff. But, if you type in as a tag like Bible, God, Jesus, you will come across people who have that same tag and want to talk about this stuff. And I've come across I've had some very, very interesting and in-depth conversations, hours long with random people whose names I never even got on Omegle. And for me, I take it as practice. And I like to think that I'm kind of planting pebbles in their shoes too. And so, yeah, that's kind of the extent of I love talking to Christians or really anyone who has a belief in anything about why they believe it. I'm just a curious person. I want to know why people think that. As far as my feelings towards Christians, I don't have any hard feelings towards Christians, not at all. I feel like a majority of them, to be honest, don't understand quite what they believe. And I found this through my personal interactions with Christians, asking them simple question, have you read the Bible? Honestly, most of them say no. Most of them. Only a handful
like
of them
you've
have
read
said,
the
yeah,
Bible more than most of them.
Right. And that's the thing is, my first question after that is, why do you believe this if you haven't even read the book that the whole thing is based off of? So I feel like a lot of them were indoctrinated into it. Maybe they never thought twice about it. They just grew up believing in God just like I did, and they never got on the same track as I did of skepticism, and just, maybe they don't care. But my thing is, I care about the truth. Do you care about the truth? That's, I want to know as many true things and as few false things as possible. Is that what you think? And if you're a Christian and you're saying this, have you asked yourself these questions, and have you honestly taken these questions into account? Because if you haven't, then I would consider that being doxastically closed, and you're not open to new evidence. So I don't necessarily have any hard feelings towards Christians or Muslims or anything like this. I just feel like they're not asking themselves simple yet important questions. It may be because they haven't straight up thought of it, or they were told not to think about it, or that it was a sin to think about it. But yeah, my thing is I want to kind of defeat that stigma, and a lot of people you can say you don't know but still be a Christian. Like, I'm not going to call you stupid if you say you don't know but yet you walk away calling yourself a Christian. I don't care. If that's what you want to call yourself and that's what's keeping you happy and healthy, go for it. I just want you to kind of think about these questions and, do you really know what you believe? Because I feel like anyone who's calling themselves a Muslim probably should read the Quran. Anyone who's calling them a Buddhist should probably read their doctrine. Anyone who's calling themselves a Mormon, read the Book of Mormon. That's kind of my biggest thing, is that I want people to understand what they believe, and if they don't understand it, why do they still believe it? So that's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, and I like what you said there, that, it's not like you look at somebody who, like some Christian who can't answer a question and is like not sure. Like, you don't look at them as being somehow like, oh, see, you're unintelligent, or you don't really think about your faith, because I mean, even for you as a person who identifies as being an atheist, I'm sure there's plenty of questions that you feel like you don't have answers to 100%. As well.
Yeah, I've been doing street epistemology, and people have asked me questions back that I don't have an answer to. I just am honest enough to where I can say I don't know, and I just don't know. I'm fine with saying I don't know. I'm not uncomfortable saying that, because there's nothing wrong with saying that. So I like to think if I say I don't know, maybe it'll make, these people who think they know, be a little bit more apt to just, say, okay, maybe I'm not 100% sure.
And that's, part of my heart with having these conversations, because I have kind of gone back and forth of like, I mean, I certainly don't want to be responsible for weakening anybody's faith.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a part of me that's like, whoa, do I really want to open up this can of worms? But I think the conviction that I've come to, and actually I had a guest on, Dr. Dave Wang, who actually does research on spiritual growth and spiritual formation. And one of the findings that he's found, and this is like a long-term, like 4 or 5 year study where they're following this group of seminarians across the country and over years and years and years, and looking at basically which ones continue to grow and be spiritually mature, and is there anything that we can see in them that's kind of like an indicator that they will continue to grow spiritually. And one of the findings that they have seen in this, and it's still ongoing, but already in the 4 years that they've done this study, one of the findings is that one of the indicators of like kind of a lifelong spiritual growth and maturity is sort of what they call religious questing, which is kind of this idea of like, I don't see myself as like, I have arrived, I'm a Christian, I have arrived, I know everything now. Right. But that it's an ongoing journey of learning, and an ongoing journey of asking questions, and kind of humility, acknowledging, hey, there's some things along the way that I might get wrong. And, I can be corrected. And that, a lot of churches maybe are scared to encourage such a mentality of like asking questions, even engaging in doubt, because, obviously they don't want people's faith to be weakened. And even myself in deciding whether or not to do this topic, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be responsible for, weakening somebody's faith. But I think the conviction that I've come to based on that research is that actually, it's healthier, and it's more likely to make somebody's faith strong over a lifetime if they're open to asking those questions, whatever those questions might be.
Yes, I fully agree to pretty much everything you just said.
Pretty much? What do you mean?
No, I pretty much agree.
All right. So another question that I had for you. So this is a little bit, I guess all the questions have been personal, but obviously you have kind of accepted that you are an atheist. But I'm just kind of curious, like over, your life so far, have there been any things, any events, any moments, any thoughts that have kind of like almost kind of pushed you in the direction of belief? Like, have there been any moments or events in your life, or even just ideas that you came across that you were like, oh, this kind of, I feel something here. Like, just curious if there's been anything like that.
Honestly, no. I would say no, not really. There's been times, obviously, when I was younger and in, middle school, high school, where I would literally lay in my bed and pray every night that I didn't get bullied because of my big ears or my acne. And I feel like that's something pretty simple that, an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God could do, is just, either cure my acne or just tell these kids not to pick on me. But yet I'd go to school and it would still happen. And then I'd go home and I would pray for it again. And then I'd go to school and then it'd happen again. I was trying essentially to have these experiences. I was seeking out for them. And eventually I just stopped praying because I was like, okay, maybe, this is when I kind of turned towards agnostic and was like, I don't know if there's anything out there, because I keep praying for this very simple thing. Just stop picking on me. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, just stop picking on me. And it just never happened. Was it to build my character? I feel like he could have done that without allowing the kids to pick on me. But I've never really had anything that I've like looked to as far as God. I think about this stuff all day, every day, literally all the time. I think about, I don't know where the beginning of the universe came from. Could that have been God? I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not at the beginning of the universe. So all in all, I don't know, and no one does. So, it's still sitting in the back of my brain. Like, technically, yes, God could have done all of this. Yes, he could have. But until we have evidence for God, we're kind of at a standstill. So, yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like this is not coming purely from just like, you read some books and then you decided that you're an atheist, but it's also just in your experience, or at least in your lack of experiencing God actually showing up.
Yes, very true.
Because you were praying for something very, very tangible and very simple, something that you feel like God could have definitely done and helped you with, and he didn't.
Yep.
And you don't really have a good answer for why he would not come through on something so simple as that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to be totally honest, that's one of the hardest questions, if not the hardest question of faith, is just like the question of suffering, right? Certainly there are definitely stories where people do have a testimony where God came through, or God did something miraculous, and then there's just as many people who have a story of, well, I prayed and nothing happened.
Right. It's how come this person had an experience and I didn't,
Yeah.
like I get, this person tripped on some ice and they landed on their side just the right way to where they didn't break their wrist. Thank God. But yet I'm
Mhm.
over here just asking that these kids stop calling me a crater face, and
Mhm.
it's here it still is, I feel like it's
Yeah.
harder to stop a broken arm than it is to which I got a broken arm too, by the way. I still got one of those. So that
Yeah.
happened too while trying to defend
Yeah.
myself from a bully, funny enough.
Oh, and they.
Yes.
So, I mean, first of all, I'm really sorry that those things happened to you, but yeah,
No,
it
no,
makes
it's all in the
sense.
past.
Yeah. But it makes sense where you're coming from and, experiencing that. And so, I feel like, again, maybe this is another conversation that we can pursue at some point, but I feel like there's a conversation here about kind of, suffering,
Hmm.
the sovereignty of God, the human freedom, and kind of, the sources of suffering. Like, I feel like there's a conversation there kind of around those topics that maybe we can revisit again sometime
For sure.
in the future. All right, Calvin, thank you so much for just coming onto the podcast and, just sharing honestly your journey of spirituality or lack of spirituality in this case. And also just, really being kind of honest, but in a very friendly way with sort of your thoughts and your questions. And yeah, I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast again, and maybe we can get into, some of these issues that we identified and raised and just have more of these conversations. But yeah, Calvin, thank you so much again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jay. I really had an awesome time. This is a podcast I haven't done yet before. It's a purely religious podcast, so this was a ton of fun for me. Yeah, I definitely will be on again. You've got my number, so.
All right, so there it is. I want to thank again my guest, Calvin Smith. The name of his podcast is Unquestionable with Calvin Smith, if you guys want to check that out. Now, I know there was so much more that we could have gone into, but this was an introductory conversation. Wanted to get to know Calvin a little bit more, and I think this is a good start. And Calvin and I have already agreed to have some more conversations this year where we'll address specific topics together. And so my hope for this series of conversations is one, that you guys would, of course, get some answers and some information about important questions about the faith. But also number two, that you guys would see how we talk to each other. Because I think that's just as important, to be able to talk to one another in a respectful way, in a way in which we honor one another and are able to actually achieve true dialogue. And so I hope that's something that you will get from this series of conversations. But before we go, I did want to reflect on one part of the conversation that I had with Calvin. And that was the part in which we were talking about the reliability of the Bible. Because I think it is a big question for some people. How much confidence do we have that the Bible that we're holding today really is the scriptures that were handed down to us from the apostles and the first century church? And Calvin brought up the fact that, there are places in the text where we see some discrepancies, or there's some questions about, what the proper translation is, or even some areas where it seems like where scribes made a change, whether on purpose or inadvertently. And so what I tried to bring out, which I want to make sure I make clear here, is that while we recognize that there are textual variants in the manuscripts for the New Testament, that the amount of manuscripts that we have for the New Testament alone is just far and away more manuscript evidence than we have for any other document in antiquity. It's just not even close. And not only that, but we also have the writings of early church fathers in which they quote from the scriptures. I've even heard it said that, let's say all of the New Testament manuscripts that we had were just suddenly we woke up tomorrow and they were gone. That we would actually be able to reconstruct most of the New Testament just from the early church fathers' writings where they quote scripture. That even just from the quoting of scripture by these church fathers, we can reconstruct most of the New Testament. And so all that to say, there is an embarrassment of riches of document sources that we can check against one another to see what is the likelihood that that original text was preserved, right? Because we can see that by how similar these texts are to one another. And if there are textual variants, where they are in the text. And so the point that I was trying to get across, which I don't know if I did very well in the interview and bringing it out, is there really isn't any reason, at least from a document manuscript standpoint, why we should question the reliability of the text that we have now. Because not only can we see that it has by and large not been changed, but also number two, maybe just as important, we know exactly where there are textual variants or where there are places where the translation of a word or a phrase is difficult for us and we're not quite sure. Or even where maybe a scribe made a change, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Like even if you buy like just a cheapy Bible, like just a cheapy Bible from some Christian store, even that cheapy Bible has notes all over it in the margins that point out to you, hey, these verses at the end of Mark are not present in the oldest manuscripts. Hey, this word here, it could also be translated this or that, right? So even the cheapest Bibles have so much of this information in there that even in the text where there is some question about what the original said or what the original meant to say, it's all out in the open. There's no mysteries. There's no secrets, right? There's so many scholars who have been studying this for hundreds, thousands of years that there's no secrets anywhere, and we know exactly where the issues are. And so that's the other thing that I was trying to bring out, is that because it is so well documented where the textual variants are, where some of the question marks are, we can say with certainty that there really is no major tenet of core Christian belief or theology that is in question because of these textual variants, right? So we're talking about things that are secondary, ancillary matters. And the other thing that came up during the interview that I wanted to just kind of briefly review is when I asked Calvin what he thinks about the historical reliability of the Bible. And that was a place where we had a bit of a difference of opinion, that he felt there was really not much historical evidence for the Bible. And I would definitely push back against that. I think actually what you will find if you do some research is that it's amazing how much historical and archaeological evidence there is to verify a lot of the people and the places and the events of the Bible. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that the spiritual and miraculous parts of the text are true. But I think something that we should be able to admit is that the scriptures are way more than just some sort of mythological text, right? That whatever you think about the Bible, I think you have to admit when you look at the evidence that it is a text that is deeply situated in real history. And there's a lot of evidence and a lot of archaeological artifacts that verify this. Now, there isn't historical and archaeological evidence to back up every single story in the Bible. That would be amazing, but that's not going to happen. I mean, some of the stories in the Bible are taking place, 10,000 years ago or something like that. But there certainly are historical and archaeological artifacts that verify parts of the story throughout the entire Bible, from Genesis down through Revelation. Names of places, names of people, cultural customs, major historical events that happened, names of kings, people groups, wars that were fought, customs that were observed, etc., that just all over the Bible, it becomes very clear that this is a book that is deeply historical in character. And so I don't know how well I brought that out during the interview, but I just wanted to make sure that I kind of hit that here as we close. And so, I would love to hear your feedback on this interview. Don't be too hard on me. Again, this is probably just the first of many conversations. We're just getting to know each other. But, I would love to hear what you guys think. Any thoughts that you have, any questions that you guys have, any pushback that you have. Maybe you think that I completely dropped the ball on some parts of it. But I would love to hear whatever thoughts that you guys have. So feel free to leave me a message. Maybe I'll use it on the podcast or send me an email. Just visit the website, dailysabbath.com. All right, guys. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Can't wait to see you guys again next week. Blessings. The closing song for this episode, For Everybody, is by Floetic Dre. For more music from Floetic Dre, find a link in the episode description. If you're enjoying the podcast and you would like to support us, you can leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can buy Pastor Jay a cup of coffee. If you would like to contact Pastor Jay, visit dailysabbath.com or our Instagram at dailysabbath.
Everybody, this is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody.
This is for people we lost this year. This is for people who fighting for peace in a world that still don't give a look. Quiet as ever when they heated. Still show love like God still love us. Showcase God when your life feel funny, but still thank God that you still here living. But this is for people who losing their job, people that rather not stop, following dreams from the start and finish with God at the top. Cause money can't rob us inside. When God is inside. I put that on everything. This is for everyone. Making an effort to help your community with unity. This is for people who lost everything and still go to God almost every day. This is for blessings that's underrated. This is for rappers with good lyrics. This is for people who get mistreated and never repeated for selfish reasons. I rap with a cause for the cause with no cost in it. No cough, no COVID-19 in it. No church, no problem, we gon' still gather. To walk more, I adore God when he open doors. They counting what lies, they trouble your mind. If y'all don't mind, I'ma uplift y'all since the word don't care, but I do care.
Listen,
put your phone down, put your hands up. You want God time, go to God now. I see you chilling with your headphones, turn it all off, and it helping y'all. The devil is alive, but he's still alive. Trying to slap pride in your heart, trying to push God, but he can't be touched. So your mind gets switched up like translated Bibles in a world that's messed up. I'm trying to Spike Lee y'all to wake up.
this is for everybody. 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 This is for everybody.
This is for everybody who do not give up when time is tough. This is for everybody who pray to God when they slip away. This is for everybody who love their neighbors when they don't love you. Loving yourself when the world don't show it. Now it's our time to show God is here. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for you. This is for everybody. This is for me. This is for everybody. This is for us.
Everybody.
This is for everybody.
This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody. This is for everybody.